You can have great chops and still sound bad on a chart. This video is about the stuff that actually makes you sound like a pro. We're going to try something different today. I've invited my friend Paul Thompson from PD Bass on to talk about what it takes to be a pro bass guitar player. Hey, it's James here from eBass Guitar. We help bass players start playing at 50 and beyond. And today, you're going to see a different side to my bass guitar playing, and you're going to hear a real world, in-depth conversation between two working bass guitar players, breaking down what it actually takes to read music, interpret a chart, and play at a high level. The kind of stuff you see in a big band, a session, or professional rehearsal setting. We're going to be talking things like how to roadmap or analyze a chart quickly, what to look for in those first 30 seconds, how to deal with complex rhythms, pushes, stops, and unison lines, and how pros think differently when playing live versus in the studio. Today, we're going to be using a wonderful Latin big band chart called Señor Salsa by the American composer John Wasson. John has kindly made the bass parts available to buy for just a few bucks. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to try or study this chart yourself. This video isn't about the intricacies of simply playing individual or right notes. It's about thinking like a professional bass player and making the music feel really good. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's go into it. Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. Wonderful job. Wonderful job.
Whew. Thanks, man.
I really enjoyed that. That's not easy. That's a very specialized bass line called a tumbao that lands in really weird places. And you really played great on that. I really enjoyed listening to you play that.
Thanks, man. What did you pick out? What was interesting?
Obviously the rhythms that you were playing, the drummer's doing a beat called a songo, mostly through that. But also some of the material, especially on that solo that you play, the soli that everybody played. It was a lot of kind of bebop-y, kind of melodic stuff that was really enjoyable to listen to. It's a great tune. It's a really enjoyable tune. It sounds like it'd be a fun tune to play, and I'm sure you had fun doing it.
Yeah, it was definitely it's the second time I played it to you, and that was much more on the edge for me. I don't know if you've had that experience, but there was one point towards the end where I was going for a G flat, and I would typically play it on the A string, but for some reason I went down there and found myself down that end of the fretboard, and it was a bit like, how am I going to get out of this one? And then you find your way back into it, and then you get these strange moments of you going, oh, is the world just about to fall apart beneath me? But then somehow you find your way out of it.
You did a really great job. I feel like on a tune like this, your eyes have to know what's going on when you're reading, but it's just as important to be able to listen really hard and to be able to hear what you're playing with. Where you're putting the beat, for instance, in this kind of music is super important to make it work. You can't be ahead of it at all. You can't be behind it at all. You've got to be dead in the center for it to feel a certain way. And also note length. You were playing nice long note lengths and articulations. It's all really comes to life when you play this kind of music to make it sound and feel the right way.
I think there are two basic sounds within this that you can go for. There's the more Jacko kind of end of things, or you can go for more of a double bass type feel closer to this end of the fret. And what I tend to prefer to do is meet it somewhere in the middle across the pickup, and then just slightly angle my hand to get slightly more fleshy sound. To get that fatness to the sound, so it kind of bridges the electric bass and the double bass kind of somewhere centrally, I think. Because going back to that original music, when you were listening to bass players like Cacheo play it, like those tumbao salsa grooves, massive fat notes on the double bass. And it's like, how do we replicate that feel on the electric bass, taking it over from the double bass? I think is the interesting thing, but yet get the dexterity that you can get on the electric bass. And some of those interesting fills and phrases which would be super, super challenging to play on upright, but can work really nicely on electric.
Absolutely. And one of my heroes, when I reference this music, is actually Anthony Jackson. He played it so well. He could play an open kind of style and make it sound and work really well. But what I find myself doing a lot when I play these tumbaos is I will palm mute with my right hand
Yeah.
and play with my thumb. And you don't have a lot of technique that way. You can't play fast, but it really punches the note and gives you this full body where you're almost like a bass drum along with what you're playing, and it fattens everything up. And I noticed that Anthony did that on a lot of records where he goes into tumbaos. He gets this huge fat sound by palm muting. So that's something I like to do when I'm playing this kind of groove is to kind of cop Anthony Jackson doing.
So you would typically take the tumbao groove into more of a... So you get the front of the note there with the palm muting and then the decay afterwards.
Yes, but I'm also thinking compositionally. I would probably play an open style in the beginning just to kind of establish the track. And as it goes on, I want it to develop into something. Specifically, when it gets into the solo section, I almost want to be a lot freer and a lot more open and different. That's where I might go into the palm muting to give it kind of a different sound, either for the entire section or between soloists, so that each soloist kind of has a different story, a different platform to play over.
Would you play palm muting all the way through it, or is it something dynamically you would use to perhaps bring it down and get a different sonic effect?
I would probably use it as a different kind of a sonic effect, depending on how hard I'm copying Anthony Jackson. That soli that you played, I could totally hear him doing his Anthony Jackson thing. He might have played that muted the whole time. He might have pulled out a pick and played it with a pick, and it would sound incredible. It depends on compositionally. When I'm playing a tune like this, I'm trying to think of the story that's being told. I'm trying to think of the compositional aspects of it and how can I build into the next section and tie it to the next section and do something a little different than I did in the last section. I love how you played the chart. You played the chart so well, and you're to be commended for that. On a chart like this, I might not, certain sections, especially the solo section, which I feel gives you permission to kind of do something different if you want to do something different there. I'm using it as a template for something to get me started, and then I might go away from it for a second and then come back to it at the end. So it's really, I'm trying to think compositionally, big picture, and really listen and build something.
Question. So when you play that on the solo section, are you playing the pushes on 4 still, or are you perhaps breaking out? And so will you be still keeping the boom, 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 those pushes there, or would you perhaps be referencing the downbeat more?
No, I'm definitely, the pushes are what make it that special thing. The push, the hitting on four is what makes it the tumbao, and that needs to be there in my opinion. But I might take it down the octave, and I would, rather than going up B flat, F, A flat, ascending each time, I might go B flat down to F, and then A flat below the B flat, and then back to F, and then back to the B flat.
So you rhythmically would keep it the same, but you would perhaps change the octaves, or the technical term for that, tessitura, I once learned, of the notes. Typically, you'd have this written, but you might reinvent that bass line as being.
Yeah, and I probably, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't jump to the E flat that like you did. I would probably come back to F each time.
Oh,
And
right.
and
So,
it works.
so you would do. You'd do. Oh, interesting choice there.
When I see a chart like this, especially when you get into a section with solos and you see chord changes, I see that as permission as a bass player, permission to please play this unless you can come up with something better, especially in a solo section. I think that what's written is a guide, but as a bass player, I'm going to have more insight to how a chart should be played, or and what feels right and what lays right on my instrument. So I feel like it really is telling you, here are the chord changes. If you can come up with something better, please do so.
I think that one is understanding the context moment and what the musical director in the scenario wants. And I think you're absolutely kind of bang on the money in this context. Here's a question for you. If you were doing this recording in a studio, would you keep it closer to the original part? And if you played it live, would you then break out a little bit more? How would you approach those two different scenarios?
Oh, absolutely. In the studio, it would be play simple, be as direct as possible. If I'm going to change anything, get permission before I do it. Hey, I'd like to try this. What if I did this here? I know that in the studio, we'd probably all run it once or twice. It would be about playing as direct and as clearly and as simply as possible so I could really nail it. Live, it becomes more of a feel thing and you're trying things. We all have more permission to kind of mess around with things live, especially in jazz music, the spirit of let me try this and see what happens. So live, it would be, fair game. I wouldn't drastically change it. My job is to make it feel right, no matter what. If I'm playing what's on the page, I have to make it feel as good as if I'm playing something that I'm coming up with. It's getting it to feel the right way.
I think you're bang on the money there. And I think the other interesting thing is this is a recording of it where they've gone twice around the solo section, which is a fairly typical thing to do on a solo. But live, you might go around it 4, 5, 6 times. And so that is the space where you want to have development in there. That's the space where you want to start trying to take it somewhere, particularly with the the rest of the rhythm section. Your drummer is your best friend at this point, and the two of you can largely push the dynamic direction of the music together.
Absolutely. And also live, I'm not thinking so much about trying to be perfect and trying to make things. Whereas in the studio, you're kind of marking, here comes that part with the eighth notes. And you're also marking parts where you can get in if you make a mistake. And where can I fix this? It's just a totally different mindset when you're in the studio. It's a micro managing kind of a thing, as opposed to a just play and let whatever comes out kind of thing.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I feel, having just performed this across the internet from the UK to America, for me, that experience was much more like a studio scenario where you're observing the part there, listening to me performing it, and it's very much a studio kind of microscope, and that's how I feel. It doesn't have that freedom that you would have on a gig, where it is just a moment in time, and hopefully that moment in time doesn't get you fired, but you can, if something goes wrong, as long as you recover, it's fine. But in this scenario, the mistakes are generally much more visible.
Absolutely. And that's the performance aspect though, mostly I'm thinking, because we both record a lot of music at home, and in the studio, and you have to know how to know how you're going to get in and fix things too. That's a part of the process when you're recording, is knowing what you did wrong when you did it, and knowing how to go in and fix it is a totally different kind of mindset, especially in 2025. We have to know how to fix the things that we want to fix easily. That's a whole other discussion. But, obviously we want to play the whole thing down perfectly from the first note to the last note. But, as a recording musician at home, you have to know how to go in and tweak those things when you need to. Playing a chart like this, can you tell me, like, maybe 5 things that you're trying to do as a professional, 5 things you're trying to accomplish playing something like this?
So when you typically see a chart like this is on a big band blow or rehearsal, and the chart will typically be doled out around the band, and you probably have about 30 seconds to look at it before you start playing it. And those 30 seconds are absolutely crucial. So the 2 first things that I'm going to look at in those first 30 seconds are the geography. I need to know how the chart runs geographically. I need to know where the repeats are. I need to know where any DSL coders are, for instance. So I have a rough idea of how the part will work, where the page turns are as well. Incidentally, page turns are getting more and more interesting as we move into iPads as well. But rehearsing page turns is very much part of actually playing a chart from beginning to end. So the first thing is knowing the geography. The second thing is looking at what the basic groove is. And if we pull out a part like Señor Salsa by John Wasson here, it is a tumbao groove. The drums are playing a songo. And this is one of these grooves that you need to know and be able to clock it on the page straight away. So let me play you the basic groove. We're going at bar 17, and this is the crucial thing that I'm clocking straight away when I get the chart. So at that point, I'm looking at what the basic groove is and what the core harmony is going on there, and just making sure I'm familiar with this. Like, this is in the key of B flat here, and I just played you the A section there. Also clocking that when we go to the B, we're going up to a harmony based around E flat there. And looking for those important moments is the first thing that I would be looking at.
Absolutely. We call that road mapping in the States. The first thing you do is sussing out where the chart jumps back, what key the chart is in, and I like to look for those ink blots as well. Those groups of ink that look a little more condensed than the other parts of the chart, where I know something hard is coming up. But yeah, we call that the road mapping is one of the most important things to do when you're sussing out a chart.
So the second thing that I would look at within this is I would look for the fundamental stops. Once I know what the basic groove is, look for those moments which are going to start getting exposed. And there are a couple of moments around here. So let me show you what I mean by the fundamental stops. So let me explain what I mean. Bar 33, you'll see the groove here. So we've got 6/8 bars of groove. Then we start hitting some stops where we're playing more in unison with the rest of the band. So some pushes there. And then right at the end, we have this phrase like ga ga ba 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 da. Those are those sort of phrases which are worth having a little look at if you've got a moment in isolation, just to get the detail down, because they sound great when they're absolutely really rock solid and tight. This is what 33 sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was great. Also, I think it's important to be aware that in a big band setting like this, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to be doing with the baritone saxophone as well. So it's important to keep an ear and keep an eye on where those things happening.
Also, you'll hear that happening with the bass trombone as well. There's many starts.
Yes, there's a lot of stuff in this music that you're going to be doubling those low instruments with, and it's important to know where those things are going to happen and that you're playing along with those people, because we're not playing in a section like a trumpet player or a saxophonist is, but we have to be really aware of when those moments happen so that we can play with everybody successfully.
So the third thing I'm looking for is the big section changes. Often in a tune like this, maybe 60% of it is one core theme, but any great piece of music always has development sections in. And that term development section comes from classical music. And this piece here, Señor Salsa, is no different. There's a great development section where you start hearing the harmony changing a little bit, but also crucially, the rhythms start changing and they become a little bit more complex and they become more unison based with the rest of the band. There's a great example of that at bar 1, 2, 3.
Absolutely, yes. And as you pointed out, you're playing with the left hand of the piano, and then the trombone comes in and doubles you. And there seems to be a build through that section going into the next section. Being aware of the changes that happen in the song are critical in being able to tell the story of the music and develop it effectively. It's a great piece.
Point number 4 that I'm looking for is the detail stops. Once you've got the general architecture of the piece down, getting those small details in, perhaps the details where you're doubling with the baritone sax, the bass trombone, or the left hand of the piano, and getting those little lines together is one of those things which just elevates the bass part to the next level. And certainly for me as a player, gives such a sense of satisfaction when it's tight. To demonstrate this, you'll hear all those little tiny, maybe 2-beat phrases, 1.5-beat phrases in there, which line up with other instruments. They make all the difference. Let me demonstrate what I mean over the intro. So a prime example of what I'm talking about here is the phrase at the end of the 4th bar. So if I play from the 3rd, you get this. That do-ga-da. Get that tight, it sounds really good. Another example of this is just before the stops. And there's this great unison phrase in bar 13. Sounds like this. That line there. Straight pentatonic stuff, but get it tight, it sounds superb.
Horn players spend a lot of time talking about articulation and how important it is. Obviously, when you have 4 trumpets playing together, they have to know what notes are long and what notes are short, what notes are accented and what notes are straight. And this is when it becomes very important for us, especially in phrases like this. That last bar you played is dot, dot, do, dot. Dot, dot, do, dot. Not dot, 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 dot. Or da, da, do, dot. It's dot, dot, do, dot. So nailing the articulations, the accents, the shorts and the longs is super, super important. And that makes you sound like you're on a higher level.
So what you're referring to is this.
Absolutely.
And the brilliant
Absolutely.
thing that you did there is that you sung the phrase ba ba boo ah or da da do da. There's so many different ways of phrasing it, and singing it for me is the best way of learning articulation like a horn player would, and then applying it to the bass guitar.
Absolutely. And when you hear horn players, if you observe them, that's the language that they talk in. That's the language that they speak in. Longs and shorts, do dot. That's what they're doing. That's being musical.
The fifth thing I want to draw your attention to is this crazy soli section, which happens at bar 151. And this is largely unison with the rest of the band. Now, this is challenging for any bass guitar player to read because you have to get the fingering patterns and the notes under your hand, which typically take a little bit of time. So in my experience, this is one of these things, if you're in a rehearsal, have a go at it, but take it home and have a look at it and take it apart, because there's some real fundamental phrases and interesting things that you can learn. For context, this took me about 2 days of practice to get down, an hour maybe one afternoon and then an hour the next afternoon to get the phrases under my hands, and then just finessing it over time so I can play it. Let me play it to you and you can hear this in action.
That was really great. You're definitely to be commended because that's not easy to do, especially as a pro sight reading something like this. That's higher level. But I will say a lot of the language that's being played during that soli is just a combination of blues, pentatonic, and some bebop concepts. So for me personally, it's about getting the sound in my ear rather than trying to count out rhythms. It's to get the sound of the phrases in my ear so that I'm more comfortable playing them and I'm really singing it.
The great thing is when you have a piece like this, you can always find some really interesting study material. And often the simplest phrases can often be the most challenging within it. Let me give you an example. Bar 179, I played around with 3 or 4 different ways to finger this. And this is the one that I came up with. Because it's a heavily chromatic line and we don't have enough fingers to play 5 chromatics in a row. So we have to work out how to do that particular position shift. And what made it even more complicated was the notes which came afterwards. If you put the next 2 bars over it, and so you're going to some slightly awkward notes and having to slide quite accurately to get the articulation in there, which just takes taking it apart, slowing it down, figuring out what works for you, the particular way you like to finger things too.
Absolutely. And that's where my respect for the great studio bass players comes. People like Anthony Jackson, Marcus Miller, Chuck Rainey, Lee Sklar, because those guys read charts like this and in the moment are really coming up with those kind of nuanced things that bring it to life. Things that take us a day or two to really suss out. Those guys are doing it right in the first or second take. And that's what makes them really magical.
Can I ask you, if you saw this soli section at a big band, let's put it in a rehearsal context. What would be your approach? How would you approach it?
Well, the first thing I would do is, depending on how much time I did while the other cats are setting up or joking around, I would be looking at it. And I would be looking at the rhythms and figuring out the fingerings in my head while everybody else, and that's a Will Lee thing. I heard that Will often in sessions when he would get hard music while people were getting sounds and telling jokes, he's practicing and trying to work out the hard stuff so that when the tape is running, he could nail it. But the first thing I would do on this solo section is I would try to figure out fingerings. I'm going to identify what's the highest note in the whole thing, what's the lowest note in the whole thing, and also odd groupings. Like if you take a look at bar 168, 169, 171, rhythms that don't fall on one, rhythms that go across the bar. I'm trying to identify those rhythms. Things that come in on the ands and the e's, those real syncopated kind of things. I'm trying to suss those out.
One of the challenges with reading this sort of rhythm is typically you're feeling a pulse of 2. And so the eighth notes actually appear more like 16th notes to me on the page. And so there's almost in my brain, I don't know if it's the same, but there's like a mental conversion going on, like in relation to the pulse of going, well, if I need to hit maybe like with 151, just those first 2 notes, that phrase is more like a 16th, and which is a certain amount of experience of having read this stuff and knowing for me that I need to go into 16th note or Latin mode where I'm feeling 2 in a bar and get that conversion going on in my head.
Yeah, I tell my students, when you're reading in 2 like this, you actually have 2 options. You can either think of a fast 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It helps some people to think that way and react that way. Or you can really think of it as a true 2, where you're really feeling 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, and you're reading those rhythms. Sometimes I have to think of a fast 4 in order for it to make sense to me. But on a chart like this, especially with these kind of rhythms, and I've seen this kind of reading before, it's easier for me to think of it in 2 and to hear those rhythms in 2 rather than a fast 4. But either way, whatever works is what you should be doing.
When I'm learning this, if I've got a difficult phrase to take apart, I'm 100% thinking of a fast 4. So bar 159 is an example. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, ba da ba 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 ba, like that. That is much easier to think of as a fast 4 when you're learning that phrase. However, what I find is if you were to feel this tune as a fast 4 all the way through, firstly, it would be exhausting. But the other thing is it will give you a really frantic feel to it, and that beautiful, heavy, laid back kind of Latin feel you would start to lose. And one thing I discovered is that when you start to really know a piece of music, you start to discover where the space is. You start to be able to leave notes later and later because you have the confidence of where to place them to get maximum fatness and maximum impact to them, which is more of a familiarity thing. What's your take?
Oh, absolutely. It's all about audiation. And I feel like I've been talking about this a lot with my students. The more you can hear something, if you know how it's supposed to sound, particularly rhythmically, the stronger you're going to play it. If you're reading a piece of music and you're going and 2 and 3 and 4 and you're not going to play it as well as if you know that it goes do 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 da do 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 dee da do 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 dee da. If you know that's the rhythm, if you can sing it, then you'll play it 100 times better than just strictly reading it. So I try to audiate everything, which is why it's important. If I had time to really work on this and I wanted it to be perfect and sound great like the way you played it, I would slow it down I would slow it down. I would play it in 4, not too slowly, but I would play it in 4 so that I'm hearing all of those rhythms. And then it would be a matter of figuring what are the best physical things to do with my hands to hit those notes. But I'm trying to hear it and sing those rhythms. And when you can sing those rhythms, if you could sit down and sing this whole soli rhythmically, not even melodically, if you could sing through all of these rhythms, then you're more than halfway there. That's the audiation part. You got to really hear it. Then it'll come out really strong.
So thank you, Paul. That's a really honest look into how professional bass players think through music like this. Not just simply on a technical level, but musically, compositionally, and in real world situations. So if there's one takeaway here, it's this: great bass playing isn't necessarily about perfection. It's about listening, it's about awareness, it's about intention. So whether you're reading charts, playing with a big band, recording at home, stepping into a rehearsal with very little prep time, these are the skills that actually make a real difference. If you've enjoyed this kind of deeper real world conversation, hit subscribe so you don't miss future lessons and breakdowns. And if you want to develop this level of musicianship in a structured way, make sure you check out the Bass Lab Plus over at ebassguitar.com. That's where me and my team go much deeper into reading, groove, feel, harmony, and professional bass playing skills. Cheers, I'm James from ebassguitar.com, and I'll see you on the next video.